Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today we revisit one of our very early from 2020 episodes with Chris Hansen from Adoptech. Chris, how are you?
I'm great, Toby. How are you?
Very good indeed. Thank you. Very good indeed. Listen, lovely to have you back on the show. Lots passed under the bridge since last we spoke, and the world is slowly starting to get back to some sort of normality and pace. And I know that you've been busy over the course of the last year. Before we go into all of that and talk about the story a little bit, refresh us all a little bit about your journey yourself and what you're doing over at Adoptech at the moment, please.
Yeah, of course. Well, first, Toby, let me say that it is actually genuinely nice to see less of you. Well done on your fitness regime. It's really paying off for you. So
get in there slowly but surely.
Yeah. So look, Adoptech, the clue's in the name. We set the business up to try and help the adoption of technology, the rapid adoption of technology. It seemed to us odd that there's so many companies that offer software as a service as solutions to enterprises, and enterprises need to innovate. Yet it seems to take 12 to 24 months for the enterprise to finally get the service up and running, and a lot can change in that time. So, in order to try and, foster the accelerated innovation, we thought we'd try and figure out, how to help these software companies get adopted by the enterprise. So that's where Adoptech it came from. And what we are is a platform business where if you imagine that you're an entrepreneur and you started your SaaS company and you're getting in at the ground floor, there'll be a certain set of services and documentation that you require, from foundation documents through to some certain set policies. And then as you move up in the entrepreneur's elevator, you'll be getting off at certain floors, and again you'll require everything from managing checklists through to managing the RFI process, right through to ultimately ISO accreditation. And really, Adoptech is there, to walk a path with the SaaS company and make sure that they are kind of born adults, that they're able to face off against the enterprise and be more easily, digested by them.
This is really interesting for me because last time we spoke, I was, saying that one of the biggest frustrations I've seen and heard over the last 5 to 10 years has been great innovation that's been stifled by procurement processes that has literally strangled small businesses with great ideas from actually being able to move a sector further forward. Looking at this last 15, 16 months, the COVID era, and seeing the need to innovate and digital transformation never moving at a greater pace. The overwhelming consensus I'm getting is there isn't too much that's happened to speed up processes internally from the enterprise sector. They remain pretty robust for obvious reasons in making sure that every box is checked and everything on point. What's happened and where we've seen is a lot more innovation around how people are being able to find a way around that particular issue, and that's where you guys have come in about looking at a specific problem in the marketplace. Tell us a little bit about this issue and why selling the enterprise is traditionally so difficult, and how you guys have really sort of helped find that solution for SaaS businesses that have probably never had it busier at the moment.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a good question. Let's try and sort of unpack that. So firstly, I think that enterprises have learned that they can innovate really rapidly. They don't need 2 to 5 years. They've had to, and we're not just talking about financial services companies, but supply chains have been restructured. People have, pivoted their businesses from making whiskey to hand sanitizers, and, you've had a distributed workforce, and, it's been, I think, astounding. And I'm sure many large company executives don't want to lose that momentum. But at the same time, procurement is there for a reason. One of the things too is to ensure that the enterprise remains, in financial services terms, it means that they can satisfy their regulatory obligations. Now, so I don't see that necessarily is going to change, but I do think there are a few sort of dynamics that will change. I think people are learning to start to accelerate the proof of concept, to do it in a sort of skinny way, if you like, so that they can really test the service offering quickly without having to go through too many hoops. Ideally, I think that the industry needs some sort of open API architecture so that you can publish a problem and consume a solution in a relatively risk-free way. What we try and do is, pre-procurement and post-deployment, take away some of the friction that is created by a small company trying to interface with a large company, right? So there's a lot of things to set up in order to start interacting with an enterprise, and we provide those services. So if your information security policies need to be configured and put in place, we have a module that helps you with that. We're at the moment working with penetration testing and vulnerability testing firms to enable that to be part of the app. So for us, it's about, we can't change the procurement cycle. There's a reason that top-tier institutions are top-tier institutions, and that's they have their own process, and they put a lot of faith and trust in that to ensure that they don't create any regulatory breaches. But nonetheless, what we can start to do is form the smaller company into something that is, much more easily digestible. So to make sure that all of the minimum requirements in order for them to interact with enterprise are already in place, so that that it starts to really accelerate the process once they start getting into procurement.
That's really important, isn't it? Because there's it's almost like a surprising naivety of the amount of people who go into to starting up a business and launching something with a great product, albeit, but then sort of run into the problems of funding strangulation from not being able to get through a procurement process, and that being a surprise. And to actually then have this arm or hands around the neck of the industry, sort of stifling innovation with great tech and great ideas that can really move an industry further forward, that's probably been usurped in many aspects by retail. And you look at the sort of threats coming from the big tech companies who are putting pressure on the banks in terms of the next wave of particularly retail banking and such like. But who knows where it goes after that. It's been about making sure that the pains ease to allow more rapid acceleration within the financial markets. I think that's quite interesting to see how you can come into that and augment it. You used a phrase off camera with me earlier on about unlocking innovation with SaaS solutions. And that to me seems to have been a big theme of the last year, where innovation is being unlocked, but it's needed time, and it's also needed a sort of catastrophic event to allow that innovation to come through. Give me a little bit more insight into the stages of innovation and how we've seen that sort of develop over the last year, and how innovation has actually been fueled through the crisis, and how companies can really win the race there as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I think innovation was happening quite a long time before I think the migration to cloud has enabled the use of cloud technologies, I would say.
But it's definitely been accelerated in FS over the last year, though, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I think that's it's a good question. There are a couple of observations I think I would make so far. I think that clearly firms have moved away from building things themselves. I think that firms have migrated to the cloud. I think that there are many SaaS companies that are solving more general problems, and they're doing that in a kind of scaled way. And as you say, the pandemic has accelerated all of that, although I do think that innovation was happening before. It's just been really accelerated now. There's a couple of other observations I think are important. I think that innovation departments were innovating in a vacuum to some extent. A lot of talk about, dare I say, crypto and blockchain, but not actually solving the problems of the business. So I think business has taken back control of innovation by stating clearly what the problem is, a problem statement, and then looking for a solution. So to some extent, innovation departments have become more part of the procurement cycle, I think. So that's sort of observation number one. And I can see that it's business heads that are driving innovation now, and I think that is also a catalyst for an acceleration. I think the other side that I've seen, particularly in financial services, is under SM&CR, there's now a person that is, accountable for many of the threats to a business. And part of that is also operational resilience. So you're seeing new roles being created, sometimes under the chief risk officer, sometimes under the chief operations officer role. That they're also accountable for, resilience. So I think, though, there's a kind of confluence of a number of things that are starting to really drive innovation. The fact that people are migrated to the cloud, that they're open to cloud providers not building themselves, that there's a personal onus on someone to take responsibility for operational resilience. Ultimately, the innovation dynamic has been accelerated in the pandemic, but a lot of the ingredients were there before.
Yeah, without question, I agree that this whole phase of innovation has been really interesting. And you look at vendors have been really looking at customer listening, and they've been spent. The companies who I've seen grow rapidly and really succeed over this period have been the ones who've looked at specific customer problems, listened to where it is, and tailored their solution, almost pivoted their solution to solve the actual issues around that. And it's led to this great crest of innovation within technology and innovation within finance. I think we've been screaming out to for some sort of stage, or for some sort of time. You also spoke to me about how you're having unlocked innovation, about the sort of 3 stages of innovation. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts around that as well.
Yeah, okay. I think your point, firstly, around micro pivots is absolutely critical. I mean, we as a firm spend a lot of time engaging with our customers. I think we've gone about it the right way. And so ultimately, we don't really have to sell anything because we know that we're solving problems. But yeah, I think I roughly break innovation down into 3 things. There's validation. Does it do what we need it to do to solve the problem? And I think, as I alluded to earlier, I think that's starting to accelerate. I think there are skinnier approaches to proof of concepts. So you've got validation, you've got integration. And again, we've kind of learned that integration is twofold. You've got technological integration, which really does come down to the enterprise. And again, we think that over time that improves as APIs become more standardized and the approach becomes more standardized. But more importantly, and certainly where we focus on, integration is around institutional integration. So how can I ensure that my SaaS company can be, digested and consumed, or the service can be consumed by the enterprise? So validation, integration, technical and institutional. And, we think the missing piece as well is around insulation. And what do we mean by that? Well, we want to make sure if I'm a large company and I'm consuming a service, that I still will always have access to that service, regardless if there's a fallout on a temporary or on a permanent basis, such as, say, a failure of a firm. So to me, you need all 3 steps to ensure that you get a really, secure way to innovate. So validate, integrate, and insulate. And for insulation for us is around, what we call cloud continuity, which is, kind of a modern day code escrow. So modern day and practical code escrow where we will ensure continuity of the service, access to the service, regardless of what happens to the company that is providing that service.
I think what's really interesting about you and the team is the sort of, and I always find this really interesting about businesses there who've sense that frustration from the other side and are now able to unlock it and provide that sort of advice and consultancy to navigate people through this. When you're talking to people and your customers for the first time, what are some of the frustrations they're seeing? I mean, you said it yourself there. I love listening and talking to business leaders and customers and people who are running businesses who've listened to their customers, who've taken on board some of these frustrations they've had and tailored the solution to it. How over the last year has that sort of conversation changed for you? What are some of the frustrations you're seeing when you're speaking to people for the first time, and how you navigate them through that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the questions or the frustrations have changed. I don't see that they're going to get any less frustrating. I think probably they'll get more frustrating. So, for example, we, recently a bank has sent out a environmental assessment using a third-party company, which has just kind of bombarded the vendors with yet more problems to solve, right? So as in, for example, we've been trying to help them because we have a whole suite of ESG policies. quite easy for us to configure bespoke policies, for them, and to allow them to be, signed off and attested and shared from, within platforms. So I don't think, so some of the frustrations are, it takes an inordinate amount of time internally to answer the questions that an enterprise is asking of a firm. So, I want to know what a given policy is on, for a vendor. You need to be able to demonstrate you have a procedure in place and that you can evidence that you are following that procedure. So that means you need to create a policy. You need to, understand and think about your process, and you need to be able to, attest or evidence that, you followed it. And that's one tiny microcosm of, the many, I mean, literally in information security, it's between sort of 400 and 800 questions that the enterprise, will be asking, right? So it's everything from creating a policy to the procedure, to evidencing it, to managing the RFI process. So again, people feel that it's very similar questions are being answered, and often the same answer. But again, they have to pass spreadsheets around the firm and get people to populate the spreadsheet, and it takes them an inordinate amount of time. So that, these are solutions that we already have many of these solutions, I guess, in sort of MVP form, and ultimately we want to create a situation where you really only answer the questions once and you store them in our application, and then we match those against the questions you're getting asked. There has been some move towards standardization, but again, I think if we tried to standardize the industry, I think we'd run out of money and time. And ultimately, what we want to do is acknowledge that, as I said already, that tier one institutions are tier one for a reason. It's not our job to standardize what they do or to tell them they're doing it wrong. It's to try and enable the companies that they want to consume the services of to be more easily digested, right? To be born adults, to be at a level of maturation that they can be, consumed. Their service can be consumed.
I think that's so important, isn't it? This isn't about paralysis of the industry through regulation and red tape stopping innovation, but it's about how you can work and lubricate the process to allow it to to allow it to happen and happen successfully, because it is doable. But it's just about that sort of, I guess, the Sherpa through the process, and be able to see people happen, grow their businesses. I want to ask you a question that is an unscripted one, so there's no preparation for you here. But if you were to talk to, there's a recent document put together by TRG looking at selling to the enterprise that I thought was really interesting. If you're sat there speaking to people who are selling to the enterprise and helping them and moving them through that process day in, day out, if you were to give one bit of advice to a company about how what they need to think about a SaaS business, thinking about selling to the enterprise, what would that nugget be?
Well, check our checklist on our website for selling.
There you go.
Of course.
Served up.
I think that you have to understand, you can't change the process or influence it. So be ready. There are, as I've said, as our understanding is that people overlook penetration tests, right? And that slows the process, because that is not something that happens overnight. So, for us, it's you would get your foundational documents. So this is probably going to be more than one piece of advice, but actually, no, the answer is
bonus episode.
Yeah. Sure. So, there are specific things that you should have in place that would accelerate being adopted by an enterprise, right? And joking aside, we do have a mini checklist on the website that's available to people for free, that they can use to make sure that they check some of those things off. So, just don't fight it. It is what it is to some extent. Maybe the advice is, therefore, whatever you do, make sure that you are doing it correctly, because it will pay off. So if don't go and cut and paste a boilerplate policy from the internet understand what your policy is, understand what your process is, and how you can evidence it. Because whether that means that you get more easily adopted by an enterprise tomorrow, or it means that you already have the foundations for ISO accreditation in the future, I would say that don't do this lightly. It's not, there's a reason that the enterprise has such rigor around their onboarding process, and that's they're wishing to protect themselves from regulations, from operational mishaps. They want to protect their customers, and you need to do the job properly, and it does take time. And obviously, that's why we're here. We're here to try and decrease that time to market and accelerate your adoption. Don't think that you can do it in a superficial way. Really embrace it. It is what it is. And as I said, we're there to try and help.
That's a really important thing I think you say there, isn't it? Because I mean, look, I don't know the numbers there, but I imagine you're talking about months as opposed to years in terms of how quickly this can speed up those processes through proper preparation. If you're having that checklist, through preparing for success, through preparing for the sort of things that you're going to have to come up against on that, you can potentially even halve your time to market on doing that. And if you look at the stranglehold of success and failure within startup SaaS businesses, about where the seed money comes from, and that pre-seed investment can dry up. It's in those, it can sometimes be a matter of months away, or 3, 4, 5, 6 months that a business fails in because of that lack of preparation. Now, if you're thinking about how you can speed that up and win that, it can be make or break. And I think that's something which is really, really important and interesting to have a look at.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, I think halving the time is probably not a stupid suggestion. Think about it, how it dominoes when you haven't got something in place, and you've got to go and get it in place, and then you get a challenge around, a statement that you've made, and then you've got to go and reset that, and then there's an inconsistency because you just cut and paste a boilerplate something process, and then suggested that that was what you do, and it isn't actually what you do. So all of this time, there's even things around. It's kind of be bold and don't answer question if you don't need to. We find that sometimes the SaaS company will be so keen to try and do the right thing that they end up answering a question that they had no business answering, and therefore what you end up is another 20 questions when you should have just said not applicable.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And so and this sort of came, going back to our first conversation a year or so ago, this came from you seeing this on the other side, didn't it? This is one of the frustrations that you felt when you're working in institutions and in the enterprise, that you could see this sort of problem occurring and the impact it had on it. Without businesses like yourselves who are enabling this sort of thing to happen, you're talking about an industry that can be quite turgid in its ability to adopt technology and move things further forward. And particularly when you're seeing more and more things come to it. You touched on it earlier on about ESG, which seems to be coming more and more into conversation every single time I'm having someone on the show at the moment. It's become very much a mainstream. I think you spoke before about the Emperor's Old Clothes, which would probably be about blockchain in the space, and how that was going to be the catch-all for everything, and speed of innovation. What sort of trends are we expecting to see at the moment? ESG, without question, somewhere towards the top of the agenda for everyone at the moment. Selling to enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, I think stepping outside of financial services, I think that ultimately, I guess my point is that the pandemic will have stretched operations. It will have increased costs as people have had to put some more labor to work to solve problems. I think that ultimately that people are going to, companies are going to not want to be hostage to more, higher wage costs and or more employment. And I think that ultimately you're going to see more sort of robotic process automation. You're going to see more technology employed. You're going to see, as I said already, people not wishing to lose momentum in the accelerated innovation cycle. You're going to see a continued migration to cloud, perhaps a little more discerning. And I think ultimately, the technology stroke growth technology story isn't isn't going to get unwound. You're not going to see an inflation move to value stocks. You're going to see growth, right? And growth is technology. And I don't see that. I just see more of the same, to be perfectly honest with you, Toby, and more problems that have been created in the pandemic, ultimately being mitigated both from a cost or operational or customer experience or risk perspective, all being driven by provision that's been given to you via software firms and SaaS companies in particular.
So the general sort of drivers of the innovation are over certainly the last few years in technology seem to have been about cost reduction, friction reduction, speed to an extent, the use of data and such like. All of these have been either to, as always with any sort of innovation, it's either to make more money or to slow down the loss of it elsewhere, isn't it? With regards to the sort of things you've just alluded to there, this sort of increasing ability to save money through technology creates a really interesting guide map for the next 5 years or so, I think, in the space, to see who has the the guts to really invest properly into this, who doesn't see this sort of blip where everyone had to digitalize and adopt the cloud and utilize its benefits. There's a lot of laggards in the FS space that took a long time to sort of move into adoption of the cloud. This has been the time where it's really sort of come very heavily to the fore, that's allowed rapid growth of a number of different businesses in the sector to come up and succeed within it. My interest on this is kind of almost like a societal sort of aspect as opposed to anything else. Is that my view is, while we were all clapping the NHS a year ago and all this sort of thing, how quickly minds move and everyone moves back to being life as usual there afterwards, once this is moved into the background a little bit, once we've beaten the pandemic at some stage one day, from that. I also wonder if and people lurch back to the same old way of being, and the rivers of Venice running clear suddenly don't become the priority of everyone again, and everyone gets onto air travel to shoot back over for a half-hour meeting in New York and all this sort of thing that comes back into it. We lose some of the gains that we've made as humanity over the course of the last year. I can certainly see that happening in this space again, where people sort of become a bit more BAU within it and lose some of the momentum of innovation. Is that something you're predicting, or do you think this has been the seismic moment where suddenly the pennies dropped and we all see the true benefit of tech in FS?
I think that some of these changes are permanent. I've wrestled with this a lot, but we can probably all talk about our parents or grandparents that have moved to electronic mediums, or now banking electronically or shopping electronically. I can see, why food delivery companies are not rolling their apps out to restaurants so that you can order in restaurant is kind of, beyond me, because I think there's some permanent changes. People aren't going to be in the office all of the time. The distributed workforce, will remain, and so I think that because it's in effect customer driven, and there are some unbelievable stories around market share growth through companies that, through luck or judgment have managed to capitalize on the pandemic. That I think that's a real eye opener, right? I mean, if you can suddenly get a multiples higher market share because you kind of got it right, I think there's an appetite to continue that. So I think I hear what you're saying, but if as we've talked about throughout this session, there are things that have changed. The cloud migration, the SMCR making someone responsible for operational resilience, the need not to want to build yourself anymore, the fact that SaaS companies understand their audience and their provide their microservice provision, the fact that retail or older generations are now moving towards digital mediums, right? I think the friction is decreasing. I think that there's more wind in the sails, and I think that some temporary changes will become permanent. And I think that means that if you slip into BAU and complacency, that you don't need to change, I think that's at your peril. And then that's even before we discuss how you're getting, I think you touched on this earlier, this whole new world of retail technology stock driven, this very different dynamic that ultimately I can see how that can completely usurp and change the market structure for asset managers, and then ultimately for the people that provide services to asset managers too, right? So I think I always thought it would come from the top. You'd see change in market structure with the banks that ultimately would drive market structure and asset management, but you can see that kind of there's a whole new dynamic that's coming in of people using directly investing in equities that I think can completely transform the way that people interface with financial services. So yeah, a lot of change into pandemic. I think that people have seen it's created a massive opportunity, and then you've got these real kind of like groundswell moves that are really starting to challenge traditional industries. So I think anyone that looks at this and thinks, oh, it's okay, things will revert back to normal, we can kind of slow it down, I think, at your peril, because, you've seen minnows become, giants almost overnight in this environment. And that was all technology that drove that. And as I said, some of it's luck, some of it's judgment, but I think, it's created, it should create a fear, I think, in all enterprises that they need to just keep running and running really hard.
That's the luck is an underappreciated skill, isn't it? That's something you want to find on every CV. You can put it
sure. Well,
let's finish, Chris, by talking about Adoptech. You're doing some great work and have been for some time with the business. Tell us what's exciting in your world right now. What's coming up, who you're talking to, and what the next 6 to 12 months looks like for the business.
Yeah. So I think what's excited me is that we started with an idea, we validated it with the market, we created a product, we went out to Google, if you like, to validate that. So, to start to bring people into our universe or sphere that we hadn't talked to historically. That's influenced our customer journey. That's influenced our pricing and, if you like, our approach. So we know what problem people are Googling for, right? And we're that solution. So that to us has created a really, cracking framework to operate under every time we roll out a feature. So, we've got checklists coming out. It's kind of an ISO thing, but think about that more as, being able to articulate your process and evidence it, right? So exactly what we talked about already. We obviously got the policy generator, which is increasingly becoming very successful. And we've got some great feedback on that. We're rolling out eDocs, so NDAs and consulting and contracts and founders and pilot and trial agreements for SaaS companies. We've got this assessment. We've formulated an assessment process. So that's the answer question bank that help people to, smart answer RFIs. And we're currently, we have been rolling out ISO 27001 or at least getting a firm ready for accreditation. And ultimately we'll look to, codify that. So and I think if I sort of look back, what's great for us is we kind of had this unhealthy juxtaposition between who is our audience, is it vendors or is it enterprises? And actually, we've now got it all into the vendors. So things like simple code escrow, cloud continuity, that's all going to sit in app, and we'll work with the vendors to provide that service. So in effect, all of the things that will make them successful with the enterprise will all be available within the Adoptech platform. And I think that's pretty cool, right?
Definitely.
So that kind of excites me.
It sounds it. And how do people? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you to find out more, Chris?
Just go on to adoptech.co.uk and click on contact us, and and we'll be right back to you.
Well, listen, it's fantastic to catch up again, and always interesting speaking to you. I've said it last time, and I'll say it again. This to me has been one of the key questions that people have been looking at and not finding answers to. And I do think it's singularly one of the biggest strangleholds to companies really managing to to take their businesses further forward. And I'm a big passionate believer in company scaling and getting through that startup phase with good ideas. And it's been really bothering me for a long time that companies don't get to that sort of opportunity to really fulfill their potential because of this problem of being able to get to enterprise. So what you're doing, I think, is fantastic, and it's always great to have you on the show, and good to see everything going well for you.
Yeah, thanks, Toby, and thanks again for giving me the opportunity to come and talk with you. And I wish you and yours well. And I worry how slim you'll be next time we meet.
You never know. I'll be disappearing. Maybe it will even be in person, Chris. I might come in on one of those
who knows?
One of those crazy cycles. I'll be flying past you next time you see it.
Remember those days, eh?
Chris, absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show, and thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks ever so much.